The wind howled through the streets of a small southern town, carrying with it whispers of injustice that had festered for far too long. The sky was heavy with the promise of rain as Jackson Cole, a retired African-American Marine Corps veteran, limped into the emergency room of St. Mary's Hospital. He clutched his side, where an old injury had flared up with a vengeance, his breathing labored and his skin slick with sweat. His medals, earned through years of valor and sacrifice, meant little here, a town where prejudice was an unspoken law etched deep into its foundations. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Jackson's life had been a series of battles, from the war zones of Afghanistan to the subtle, insidious racism of his hometown. Yet he never allowed bitterness to consume him. He believed in perseverance, in dignity, in rising above. But as he stepped into the fluorescent-lit hospital, his hope wavered. He could feel the weight of judgment in the stares of nurses and patients alike. At the reception desk, he explained his condition, his voice steady despite the pain. The receptionist's smile faltered the moment she noticed his dark skin. She murmured something about waiting and gestured vaguely toward a corner of the room. Jackson complied without complaint, lowering himself onto a hard plastic chair. Minutes dragged into an hour. The pain intensified, his breaths coming in shallow gasps. He watched as others, some with minor injuries, were ushered in ahead of him. His mind raced, but his training kept him composed. The doors swung open and a tall man in a crisp white coat emerged. Dr. William Kane was the hospital's chief physician, renowned for his expertise and infamous for his narrow-mindedness. His smile, thin and sharp, vanished the moment his eyes met Jackson's. He approached with a stiffness that betrayed his unease. "What seems to be the problem?" Kane asked. His tone clipped. Jackson explained, describing the sharp pain and his history of injuries. Dr. Kane listened, but his gaze kept darting around, avoiding Jackson's eyes. After a brief, perfunctory examination, Kane straightened, his expression unreadable. "You're in the wrong place," Kane said flatly. "We're a small hospital with limited resources. There's a clinic in the next county that might be better equipped for your kind of case." Jackson blinked, stunned. He knew what Kane meant even if the words were unspoken. His chest tightened, not from the pain in his ribs, but from the cold slap of humiliation. "Doctor," he said, his voice firm despite the ache. "I've served this country. I've risked my life for the freedoms we all enjoy. All I'm asking for is medical attention." Kane's lip curled. "And I'm telling you we can't help you. You need to leave." The room fell silent. Nurses avoided Jackson's gaze, their discomfort palpable. Patients whispered among themselves. Jackson rose slowly, the effort costing him more than he let on. "Thank you for your time," he said, his voice steady, though a storm brewed within him. He stepped out into the rain, the cold drops mingling with the heat of his anger. But Jackson Cole was not a man to be defeated. He had faced far worse. As he walked away from the hospital, each step a battle against his failing body, an idea began to take shape. A plan fueled not by vengeance, but by the desire to create change. Over the following weeks, Jackson poured every ounce of his energy into this mission. He reached out to local veterans, many of whom shared similar stories of discrimination. He connected with civil rights activists, medical professionals, and journalists. Together, they uncovered a pattern of bias at St. Mary's Hospital, with Dr. Kane at the center of numerous complaints that had been quietly swept under the rug. Jackson's story gained traction, spreading across social media and news outlets. The image of a decorated veteran turned away in his hour of need struck a nerve, igniting outrage across the nation. Donations poured in from people moved by his plight, and Jackson used the funds to establish the Freedom Health Initiative, a mobile clinic dedicated to providing free, high-quality care to underserved communities. The mobile clinic, staffed by compassionate doctors and nurses, became a beacon of hope. It traveled from town to town, offering treatment to those who had been marginalized and neglected. Jackson's vision was simple: to ensure that no one else would experience the pain of being cast aside due to the color of their skin. Meanwhile, the pressure on St. Mary's Hospital intensified. Protests erupted outside its doors, demanding accountability. Journalists unearthed a trove of damning evidence against Dr. Kane, exposing his history of discriminatory practices. Under mounting scrutiny, the hospital board was forced to act. Kane was dismissed, his medical license revoked, and the hospital pledged to reform its policies. But Jackson's work was far from over. The Freedom Health Initiative grew, expanding its reach and impact. He partnered with organizations across the country, creating a network of mobile clinics that brought healthcare to the most remote and neglected corners of America. His efforts earned him national recognition, but Jackson remained humble, always redirecting the spotlight to the team that made it all possible. One evening, as Jackson sat in the clinic's small office reviewing patient files, a young man walked in hesitantly. He was white, in his 20s, and wore the uniform of a fast food worker. "Mr. Cole," the man began, his voice trembling, "I just wanted to say thank you. My mom was treated at your clinic last week. She's doing much better now." Jackson looked up, his tired eyes softening. "That's what we're here for," he said simply. The young man hesitated, then added, I used to work at St. Mary's. I saw what happened to you that day. I didn't do anything to stop it, and I've regretted it ever since." Jackson studied him for a moment, then extended his hand. "It's never too late to do the right thing," he said. The young man grasped it, tears in his eyes. In the years that followed, Jackson's initiative transformed healthcare access for countless people. His clinics inspired similar programs nationwide, creating a ripple effect of compassion and change. He never sought revenge against Dr. Kane or the hospital that had failed him. Instead, he turned his pain into purpose, proving that even in the face of injustice, humanity and resilience could prevail. And so, Jackson Cole became more than a veteran or a victim. He became a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of standing tall against adversity. His story reminded the world that change begins with one person refusing to accept the status quo, and that even the smallest act of courage can spark a revolution. Jackson's life began to transform into something greater than he had ever imagined. The Freedom Health Initiative was no longer just a dream, but a movement that resonated across the country. Its signature mobile clinics, emblazoned with a bold slogan, "Care without discrimination," became a symbol of hope. In neighborhoods where healthcare had always been a distant dream, the clinics parked proudly, their arrival greeted by eager crowds. From rural farmlands to urban sprawls, they embodied a new era of accessibility, compassion, and equality. The movement, however, was not without its challenges. While support poured in from many corners, there were whispers of resistance. Some hospitals and local officials, steeped in the old ways, saw Jackson's initiative as a threat. Anonymous letters filled with hate began arriving at the Freedom Health headquarters. Some accused Jackson of stirring trouble, while others threatened to dismantle his work through lawsuits and political pressure. But Jackson was no stranger to adversity. His military training had taught him how to handle resistance, not through brute force, but through strategy and persistence. He surrounded himself with allies, lawyers who believed in justice, activists who had fought similar battles, and community leaders who understood the value of what he was building. Together, they formed a shield around the initiative, ensuring that no amount of intimidation could derail their mission. Amid these struggles, Jackson discovered stories that fueled his resolve. One such story was that of Maria Alvarez, a single mother from a small border town in Texas. Maria had lived with chronic pain for years, but had always been turned away from local clinics because she couldn't afford treatment. When the Freedom Health mobile unit arrived in her town, she was treated not only with expertise, but with dignity. Maria's recovery allowed her to work again and provide for her children. In a heartfelt letter, she thanked Jackson, saying, "You didn't just give me my health back, you gave me my life." Then there was Jamal Thompson, a high school athlete whose dreams of a football scholarship had been jeopardized by a knee injury. His family couldn't afford the surgery he needed, and they had resigned themselves to seeing his potential go unfulfilled. When the mobile clinic reached their community, Jamal was given the surgery and physical therapy he needed to recover. A year later, he sent Jackson a photo of himself holding a college acceptance letter and wearing his new team's jersey. These stories became the backbone of the Freedom Health Initiative, proof that its impact went far beyond statistics. For every life saved, for every family healed, Jackson knew they were proving something profound, that healthcare was not a privilege but a right, and it could be delivered with integrity and fairness even in a system that often seemed rigged against the vulnerable. As the initiative grew, so did its ambition. Jackson began to host forums where people from all walks of life could come together to discuss the state of healthcare in America. He invited doctors, nurses, patients, and policymakers to the table, fostering conversations that were often uncomfortable but always necessary. These forums, dubbed Healing the Divide, became a platform for addressing systemic inequities. They illuminated the deep cracks in the healthcare system while also showcasing innovative solutions. One such forum attracted national attention when a prominent senator attended and publicly endorsed Jackson's vision. "What Mr. Cole has built is not just a mobile clinic," the senator said. "It's a blueprint for how we can reimagine healthcare in this country. This endorsement brought a new wave of attention and scrutiny. Media outlets, both supportive and critical, began delving into Jackson's life. Some tried to paint him as a hero, while others sought to find flaws in his story. A particularly hostile interview with a conservative commentator asked him if he thought he was overstepping by challenging traditional institutions. Jackson's response was calm and measured. Overstepping? No. I'm stepping up. I'm filling a gap that shouldn't exist in the first place. If the institutions we rely on had done their job, there would be no need for the Freedom Health Initiative. The interview went viral, sparking a national debate. While some decried Jackson as a troublemaker, the majority rallied behind him. Donations surged once again, allowing the initiative to expand its fleet of mobile clinics and hire more medical professionals. But amidst the triumphs, Jackson faced personal challenges. The physical toll of his old injuries often left him exhausted, though he refused to let it show. His closest friends and colleagues began urging him to slow down, to take care of himself as diligently as he cared for others. Yet Jackson found it hard to step back. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him every day, a constant reminder of the people depending on him. One evening, while visiting a clinic in a small Appalachian town, Jackson collapsed. The staff rushed to his side, and for the first time, Jackson became a patient in his own initiative. The diagnosis was severe exhaustion, compounded by lingering complications from his military injuries. As he lay in the mobile clinic's examination room, the irony was not lost on him. Here he was, the founder of an initiative to heal others, now relying on the very system he had built. During his recovery, Jackson was forced to reflect. For years, he had poured everything into his mission, often neglecting his own well-being. He realized that if he was to continue leading this movement, he needed to lead by example. He began delegating more responsibilities to his trusted team, empowering them to carry the vision forward. He also made a commitment to focus on his health, understanding that his strength was vital to the initiative's future. As Jackson regained his energy, the Freedom Health Initiative reached new heights. Partnerships with universities brought in young, idealistic medical students eager to make a difference. Collaborations with tech companies introduced innovative solutions, such as telemedicine and advanced diagnostics, to the mobile clinics. Jackson also launched a mentorship program for aspiring healthcare professionals from underrepresented communities, ensuring that the next generation would be equipped to continue the fight for equity. One of the most significant moments came when the Freedom Health Initiative was invited to speak at the United Nations. Jackson stood before a global audience, sharing the story of how one man's rejection at a hospital had ignited a revolution. He spoke not just of the challenges, but of the triumphs, the lives changed, and the hope restored. His words resonated far beyond the room, inspiring similar initiatives in other countries. By the time Jackson returned home, the Freedom Health Initiative was no longer just a national force. It had become a global movement. Clinics inspired by his model began appearing in underserved regions worldwide, from remote villages in Africa to inner-city neighborhoods in Europe. Jackson's vision had transcended borders, proving that compassion and innovation knew no bounds. Yet for all his success, Jackson remained deeply grounded. He often spent time at the clinics, talking to patients, listening to their stories, and reminding himself of why he had started this journey. He never lost sight of the moment that had set everything in motion, the day he was turned away from St. Mary's Hospital. It was a painful memory, but one he carried with pride, for it had given birth to something extraordinary. Years later, as Jackson prepared to step down from his leadership role, he addressed his team one final time. "What we've built here is more than a network of clinics," he said. "It's a promise that no matter who you are, where you're from, or what you look like, you will be treated with dignity and care. That promise doesn't end with me. It lives on in all of you." His words were met with a standing ovation, tears in the eyes of many who had walked this path with him. Jackson knew his work was far from over, but he also knew it was in capable hands. As he left the stage, he felt a sense of peace, a rare moment of contentment in a life defined by struggle and resilience. Jackson Cole's legacy was not written in stone, but in the lives he touched, the barriers he broke, and the hope he ignited. He had turned rejection into revolution, pain into purpose, and in doing so, he had changed the world. The day Jackson officially handed over the reins of the Freedom Health Initiative marked a profound milestone. But it was far from the end of his story. With a sense of accomplishment but also an undercurrent of uncertainty, he stepped away from the day-to-day leadership and allowed the organization to flourish under a younger generation of visionaries. Jackson was not someone to sit idle, however. Even as he transitioned into this new phase of his life, he felt the pull of purpose, as though destiny whispered that his journey was far from complete. Jackson returned to his hometown, the place where his story of rejection and resolve had begun. He found it both familiar and unfamiliar, a town seemingly caught in a time warp. While some aspects had progressed, a few new businesses, slightly improved infrastructure, much remained the same. The old prejudices still lingered in the air, like a ghost that refused to be exorcised. For Jackson, coming back was less about nostalgia and more about confronting the roots of his struggle. He purchased a modest property on the outskirts of town, transforming it into a community center. This wasn't just any community center, it was a hub for education, mentorship, and empowerment. Jackson envisioned it as a place where the next generation could find opportunities their parents never had. A place where systemic barriers could be dismantled from the ground up. He named it the Rising Tide Center, inspired by the belief that a rising tide lifts all boats. The center offered a range of programs: health workshops, financial literacy classes, trade skill training, and youth leadership initiatives. But perhaps the most impactful program was the one Jackson personally led, a storytelling forum where people could share their experiences of hardship, resilience, and triumph. He believed in the transformative power of stories, that they could bridge divides and foster understanding in a way few other things could. These sessions quickly became the heart of the center, drawing people from all walks of life. One evening, during a particularly moving session, a young woman named Alyssa shared her story. A single mother in her early 20s, Alyssa had faced homelessness after escaping an abusive relationship. Her voice trembled as she recounted nights spent in her car, wondering how she would provide for her infant son. The Rising Tide Center had connected her with resources that helped her find housing and a job. "This place saved my life," she said, tears streaming down her face. "And because of that, my son will have a chance at a better future." Jackson felt a lump in his throat as he listened. Alyssa's story reaffirmed why he had returned to his roots. He had always believed that change started at the local level, that the most profound transformations often happen not in boardrooms or capitals, but in small, overlooked communities like this one. As the Rising Tide Center grew, Jackson began to notice a subtle but significant shift in the town's atmosphere. The center became a neutral ground where people of different races, religions, and socioeconomic backgrounds could come together. It wasn't perfect, progress never is, but it was a start. Jackson observed teenagers from historically divided neighborhoods working side by side on community projects. He saw older residents who had once harbored deep-seated biases sitting in workshops led by younger, more progressive voices. Despite these advancements, not everyone welcomed the change. Some saw the Rising Tide Center as a disruption, a challenge to the status quo. Anonymous letters found their way to Jackson's mailbox, filled with veiled threats and hateful rhetoric. On more than one occasion, graffiti was scrawled across the center's walls. But just as he had with the Freedom Health Initiative, Jackson met this resistance with resolve. He refused to back down, knowing that the center's impact far outweighed the noise of its detractors. One particularly poignant moment came when a local police officer, a middle-aged white man named Tom Jenkins, approached Jackson after a community meeting. Tom had grown up in the town, steeped in its old traditions and prejudices, but years on the force had exposed him to the realities of injustice in ways he hadn't anticipated. "I used to think places like this were just feel-good nonsense," Tom admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "But I've seen the difference you're making. I want to be part of it." Jackson looked at him, measuring the sincerity in his eyes. "It's never too late to make a difference," he replied, echoing the words he had once spoken to a young man years ago. Tom became an unlikely but powerful ally, using his position to foster better relationships between law enforcement and the community. He joined the center's advisory board and advocated for programs that trained officers in cultural sensitivity and conflict resolution. His involvement sent a powerful message. Change was possible, even in those who had once been part of the problem. As the Rising Tide Center solidified its place in the community, Jackson turned his attention to a broader vision. He began documenting his journey, not just as a means of preserving his legacy, but as a blueprint for others. He wrote a memoir, Wounds That Heal, a journey from rejection to revolution, which chronicled his experiences from his time in the military to his work with the Freedom Health Initiative and the Rising Tide Center. The book was raw and unflinching, laying bare the pain, triumphs, and lessons of his life. The memoir became a bestseller, sparking conversations across the nation. Book tours took Jackson to cities and towns he had never visited, where he met countless people who shared how his story had inspired them. A teacher in Chicago told him she had started a classroom initiative to teach empathy through storytelling. A nurse in Kansas shared how she had confronted her own biases after reading his book. Each encounter reaffirmed Jackson's belief in the ripple effect of change. One of the most memorable stops on his book tour was a university in the Northeast where he was invited to deliver the commencement address. Standing before thousands of graduates, Jackson spoke of resilience, compassion, and the courage to challenge injustice. "Each of you has the power to change the world," he said, his voice strong and steady. "Not by waiting for someone else to fix what's broken, but by taking that first step yourself. Change doesn't require perfection, it requires persistence." The speech went viral, reaching millions online. Jackson's words resonated far beyond the graduating class, inspiring people from all walks of life to take action in their own communities. His message was clear: the fight for justice and equality was not the work of a chosen few, but a collective responsibility. As the years passed, Jackson continued to defy expectations. He became a sought-after advisor for policymakers, helping shape healthcare and community development initiatives at the national level. Yet he never lost sight of where it all began. He returned to the Rising Tide Center regularly, often slipping in quietly to sit among the participants and listen. It was there, among the people, that he felt most at home. One evening, as Jackson walked through the center's garden, a space he had designed to provide a quiet refuge for reflection, he was approached by a teenage girl named Nia. She was one of the center's rising stars, a bright, ambitious student who had benefited from its mentorship program. "Mr. Cole," Nia began hesitantly, "I just wanted to say thank you. Because of you, I believe I can do something important with my life." Jackson smiled, his eyes softening. "The world needs your voice, Nia. Don't ever doubt that." Nia nodded, her confidence growing. "I won't, and one day I'll make sure places like this exist everywhere." As Jackson watched her walk away, he felt a sense of fulfillment unlike anything he had experienced before. The torch was being passed, and he knew it was in capable hands. His journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but it had been worth every step. In the twilight of his life, Jackson Cole remained a force of nature. He had built more than institutions. He had built a legacy of hope, resilience, and possibility. His work had shown the world that even the deepest wounds could heal, that even in the face of rejection, revolution was possible. And in the quiet moments, as he sat in the garden or listened to the stories of those he had helped, Jackson knew one simple truth: he had made a difference, and that was enough. One such moment occurred at a global summit on healthcare reform, where Jackson was honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award. The audience rose to its feet as he approached the podium, a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Jackson, though visibly moved, spoke only briefly. "This award isn't mine alone," he said. "It belongs to every doctor, nurse, advocate, and patient who believed in the radical idea that healthcare should serve everyone, equally and without prejudice. It's a testament to what we can achieve when we see each other as human beings first." Jackson spent his remaining days weaving connections between his past and future generations. He became a mentor to young leaders who sought him out for guidance. These were individuals from diverse backgrounds: students, activists, and community organizers, each eager to learn from a man who had turned his pain into a movement. Jackson's advice was always simple but profound. Never let fear silence you, and never let hate define you. Your voice is your greatest weapon, and your empathy is your greatest strength. As his health began to decline, Jackson found solace in the quiet moments at the Rising Tide Center, often retreating to its garden. He would sit on a weathered wooden bench beneath a sprawling oak tree, gazing at the life bustling around him. Children played in the open fields, their laughter a reminder of the future he had worked so hard to protect. Volunteers worked tirelessly in the classrooms and clinics, their dedication proof that his mission would outlive him. One day, as he sat in the garden, Jackson was approached by a group of local children who had heard stories about him from their parents. They asked him to tell them his favorite story, and Jackson smiled. He began to recount the tale of a seed, a tiny, unremarkable thing that, when planted in the right soil and nurtured with care, could grow into a mighty tree. "That's what change is like," he explained, his voice warm and steady. "It starts small, almost invisible, but with patience and effort, it becomes something powerful. You just have to believe it's possible." The children listened intently, their wide eyes reflecting the hope Jackson had spent his life cultivating. As they ran off to play, one of them turned back and shouted, "We'll plant seeds too, Mr. Cole!" Jackson laughed, a deep resonant sound that lingered in the air long after the children had gone. He knew then that his work, his legacy, and his spirit would endure, not in monuments or accolades, but in the countless lives he had touched and the seeds of change he had sown in hearts around the world. As his time dwindled, Jackson found comfort in knowing that his legacy was secure. The Rising Tide Center had become a cornerstone of the community, a model that was being replicated in other parts of the country and even abroad. The Freedom Health Initiative had expanded into other nations, and Jackson's name was known in corners of the world he had never imagined. Yet, for all the accolades, what mattered most to him were the personal stories. The ones that had stayed with him since the beginning. The veterans who had walked through the doors of his clinics and found not just healthcare but dignity. The children who had grown up in communities where they had once seen little hope and now stood poised to become leaders themselves. One afternoon, just days before his passing, Jackson received a visitor. It was Maria Alvarez, the single mother from the Texas border town whose letter had once touched his heart. Now, years later, she was a thriving entrepreneur, running her own business and helping others in her community get the health care they needed. Maria sat with him, holding his hand and recounting how her life had been transformed by the work he had started. "Jackson," she said, tears welling in her eyes, "you didn't just change my life, you changed all of ours. You gave us back something we had lost, hope, and because of that, my children will grow up in a world that's a little bit better." Jackson smiled weakly, but his eyes were filled with pride. "It wasn't just me," he whispered. "It was all of you. We did it together." That evening, his closest friends gathered at the Rising Tide Center to honor his life. It was a small, intimate affair, a quiet gathering of the people who had witnessed his journey from the beginning. They spoke of Jackson's unwavering belief in the goodness of people, of his capacity to forgive, and of his incredible ability to see potential where others saw none. As the evening wore on, the room filled with stories, some lighthearted, others more somber, but all marked by a shared reverence for the man who had changed the course of their lives. The night was a testament to the truth of Jackson's life. The true legacy isn't found in the grand gestures or the monuments built in one's honor, but in the countless lives touched, in the ripple effects that spread out far beyond what any single person could imagine. Jackson Cole had sparked a revolution in healthcare, in community building, and in the hearts of people everywhere. His death was not an end, but a transition, a passing of the torch to the countless individuals he had inspired. And though Jackson was no longer physically present, his influence lived on in every clinic, in every community center, and in the hearts of the people who carried his message forward. His legacy had become a living, breathing entity. Jackson had left behind a world forever changed, and in that world, hope remained alive. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on a racist doctor refusing care to a black veteran? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.